Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the Kid Lit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of Kid Lit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kid Lit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your Kid Lit loving host, inviting you to another weekly conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I am thrilled to talk with Lauren Castillo, both author and illustrator, with a long list of beloved books under her belt. You might recognize titles she's illustrated like What Happens on Wednesdays, Yard Sale, Imagine, The Pig and Miss Prudence, Alfie Runs Away, 20 Yawns, The Reader, and my recent favorite, This Is a Story. And books that she's both illustrated and authored are Friend Hedgehog, The Troublemaker, Melvin and the Boy, Nana in the City, and her newest picture book that we're talking about today, Just Like Millie. I am so thrilled to welcome Caldecott Honor winning Lauren Castillo to the podcast. Lauren, welcome. I'm so glad you're here today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Stephanie.
I said before we started recording that I felt like it was a pinch me moment that I got to talk to you one-to-one because I've held your books in my hands so many times. I've shared them with my students. I've shared them with my children. And now I just read them for me too, because I think all adults should still do that. I'm so grateful you took the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. That really means a lot to hear. So,
I'm
especially that you read them with your children. That's sweet.
Yes. Well, I started the opening of the podcast listing through some of your books that listeners would likely recognize. And I imagine that some of your titles that they know and love are springing to their mind as well, if I didn't mention them. So I'd like to start with you and your journey to all of these books. Like, I got a big question to start off with, which is,
Sure.
how did this whole journey begin? And how did you go from there to here with this beautiful backlist of books and a brand new picture book ready?
Well, I was a huge fan of drawing and all types of art as a kid. And so, like, I naturally kind of, went in that direction into high school and took all my electives in the art, art classes. And I really was fortunate because I ended up scoring an amazing art teacher, and he happened to be an illustrator. And so he was actually the first illustrator that I ever had met. And so he really like encouraged me to kind of start fine tuning a portfolio for art school. And so I went, the route that a lot of illustrators do. He ended up helping me, put together this portfolio, and I applied to Maryland Institute College of Art, which was in the state that I grew up, Maryland. And so I went to school, went to school there, and right away became an illustration major. And now illustration is kind of a broad field because, you can go into the editorial world or, more advertising. And I was just always drawn to picture books. So I didn't have that aha moment until that may be something I wanted to do until I would say my junior year of college at Maryland Institute. And I took a children's bookmaking class, and the teacher there, was super encouraging, and we put together, our first kind of mock-ups of picture books. And then it was kind of, that was it for me. Like, I knew that was the format of illustration that I wanted to pursue. So yeah, started there, and then I went straight from undergrad to graduate school. I moved to New York City, went to School of Visual Arts, and got my MFA in illustration as visual essay, it's called. And in that program, it was funny because there were only 20 students, and generally the students that apply to that program are more in the editorial and marketing side of illustration. But we just so happened to have 5 of us that were really passionate about children's books, and so 5 out of 20 was huge for one of those types of classes. And the 5 of us just band together, and we would, like, as we were building our portfolios more and more over those first year, the 2 years of school, we would actually, it was a time, this was the early 2000s, it was a time where you could take your portfolio to a publishing house and actually do what was called portfolio drop-offs. And the art directors, the designers, they would look at your portfolio and they would leave notes in there, and at the end of the day you would go pick it up. And so some people that you listeners might recognize, some illustrators, are Jonathan Bean, Shadra Strickland, Taeyoon Yu, and Paul Hapa. Those and me. There was 5 of us that were in the class together, and we really kind of hit the ground running, and were determined to get published works. So it was in grad school that I started to build those connections to different editors and art directors that I would meet with at the publishing houses. And so it was kind of an old school way. I guess it's different these days. These days you kind of go through an agent. You have a literary agent, and they promote you. They pitch your art to publishers. But for us at the time, it was all our doing. We didn't have agents at that period of time. So we would have these meetings, and we all made connections in various ways, and that's how I ended up getting a contract for my first illustrated book, which is What Happens on Wednesdays. And that was with Frances Foster was the editor there, and she had come into our graduate class, and she did a critique. And I had a conversation with her after the critique, and she told me to send her my contact information. And then several months later, she had reached out and said that she had this manuscript that might be the perfect fit for me. And I was so flustered. I mean, I really wasn't expecting that. So it was like, about 6 months after graduation, I received that. And she was just so generous. And this is Frances Foster. She would keep me in mind for projects, and I worked with her up into the end of her career. She was in her 80s when she ended up retiring. So she really is the reason that I was able to get into the field of children's literature, and from there on, I was able to make more connections. But yeah, that's a very long-winded version of my "how did I get here" story. So yes, I feel super fortunate to still be doing this for my living. So.
Well, I love long-winded stories. That's exactly what I hoped you would say, was a longer version of a story. And as an educator, what jumped out at me right away was the power of a teacher.
Yes.
To keep planting that seed. I love when authors, illustrators, bookish people can kind of trace their backstory all the way back to that one teacher that maybe lit that little spark. So I love that your story started there.
Oh yeah.
I think the other thing
everybody has at least, I'm sorry. I was going to say everybody has at least one of those teachers. So, and usually more, but yes.
Yeah, they're so important. But the other thing that jumped out at me, one of my favorite quotes is by Jim Rohn.
Okay.
And, I think other people have said it in other places, but basically the quote he says is that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Whether, what that means to you is another story, but the idea is that what you surround yourself with matters. And you talked about the 5 people in your group that were just, doing the same thing and helping and networking, and that energy was going back and forth. And it just seemed like that was such a huge part of how the stars aligned for you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that quote. I hadn't heard that, but I'm certainly going to keep that in my mind so I can write it down after our interview.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. That's very true. So, and I was very fortunate to have those people with me, and we were all cheerleading each other along the way. So it was awesome. Yeah.
It matters. All that matters. And book people are the best people. And it seems like the energy there was a really good combination.
Absolutely.
Well, I would love if we could talk about a whole bunch of your books, but we don't have that time because you have such a beautiful backlist. So we are here to talk about your newest picture book. And we aren't on video, so listeners can't see it, but it's a huggable book with the cover with this beautiful character and the dog. It's beautiful. It's called Just Like Millie. And I know as I read it, and I imagine this might happen for other readers too, I kept thinking, I'm just like Millie. Right? I could find pieces of my personality and pieces of the in this book. It is just, to me, it feels like this beautiful ode to the introvert, to the power of making connections, and to four-legged friends too, which is wonderful. So I would love if, in your own words, you could tell listeners about Just Like Millie, of which you've both authored and illustrated, which is a beautiful combination.
Yes. Well, I will say now that you mentioned that I authored and illustrated it, I like I haven't so the last picture book that I had author illustrated was Nana in the City in 2014. That was picture book. And then I kind of changed gears and ended up heading to the early chapter book world. And so I worked on, and I'm still working on, a series called Our Friend Hedgehog. It's a young chapter book series. So I stopped working on picture books for such a long time, and I was really missing the format of picture books. And so Just Like Millie was one of the first picture books that I've worked on since that 2014. So it's been 10 years, which is crazy to say, since I've had a picture book that I wrote and illustrated come out. And so Just Like Millie is one of them. The other one I'll just throw out there is Nana in the Country, which is a very long sequel, a long awaited, I guess, for me, sequel to Nana in the City. So anyway, but today I want to talk about Just Like Millie because that is my newest. And this you said you could relate to Millie.
Well,
I really relate to the girl in this story. So the story is about a little girl and her mom who moved to a new city, and her mom is struggling to find some outlets for the little girl. The little girl is just wanting to be on her own, wanting to, she says, there's a line in the book that she's just fine on her own. It keeps turning down her mom's offers to take her to to a friend's date, the playground, a book, a reading at the bookstore, and eventually, the little girl's in tears after all of the ways that she feels her mom is pushing her to socialize. And her mom one day tells her they're going out on a surprise little errand, and they end up at a dog rescue. And she introduces her to a dog named Millie. And the little girl's very intrigued and says that she would like to take Millie home. So they end up rescuing this dog. And right away, Millie is the most social, like from the get-go, from their walk home. Millie, the little girl, is observing every move of Millie's. She's interacting with strangers on the street, and she seems to make friends wherever they go. And so really it's this transformative, this way that this little girl transforms through watching her new dog. And she sees how easy it is for Millie to make friends. And eventually, I don't want, spoiler alert, by the end of the story, she has the courage to make her own first friend in her new city. So it really is a story about, it's kind of a dog rescue story, but it's all, and, the power of animals, and how they can affect us. And I even think about, like, one of the things I thought about when I was writing this story is that I had two old kind of senior dogs when I was writing this. They've both since passed away a few years ago now, but I was channeling, my experience with them. And, I got to meet a lot of my neighbors because I was fairly new to this city. And I got to meet a lot of my neighbors because of the walks that I took with my dogs.
Yeah.
And, they were friendly with the neighbors, and that got us, opening up. And it was like the first, way to conversation starter, and so I thought about, how that is for a lot of us. And especially those of us that have some, a bit of social anxieties, maybe, or just anxieties in general. And like dogs and animals can be such a comfort in that way. So,
Yeah.
that's why there are service dogs, service animals,
Yeah.
And Millie is not that, but this is just a way that, the little girl is able to start opening up is through Millie's eyes. And I also witnessed another kind of um way that this story came about is that I witnessed my friend's son, and he's a very introverted little boy. And once we were around his dog, he started answering like all of these questions and wanting to share all about his dog and all about like his favorite things. And his personality, just like his face just lightened up, and he just was so ecstatic to talk and to share. And so yeah, a lot of things kind of combined um were how this idea came about. And I think it was brewing for several years, and that seems to be how stories come out of me. Same happened with Nana in the City. I guess without even knowing it, I'll be like internalizing like all of these different pieces of what then one day, like one morning, come together as like, just I just blob it out on on a sketchbook page, and then like I have suddenly a rough draft of a book. And like this doesn't happen for me regularly. This is like, years in the making. And so it's just such a magical thing when my brain does that. Sometimes you try to force it and it doesn't work out that way. So yeah. So anyway, that's just another long-winded answer of like a lot of ways in which the story came together. And I said it's about dog rescue, and it's also about um, shyness and social anxieties, and how children cope and deal in different ways. And yeah, so I hope that the book is you know able to connect with different types of people, because it has different layers in that way. So I'm really excited to see it out in the world and to get some feedback from little readers, and see what they think about it and see how they connect with it. So yeah.
Well, this adult reader loved it. And I realized, as I said to you, like, I was just like Millie. What I meant to say was, I am the girl. I
Oh,
was
see,
that
I
girl. I needed Millie. I
I
needed
see.
Millie. So I'm like, wait, I totally got that backwards. I
The
was the bookworm.
yes.
She was much happier by herself in her room. I had a nice close friend. I didn't need much more. So I definitely connected instantly with
Yes.
the little girl in the book. And even as an adult, so this, I hope this doesn't come out sounding weird to listeners, but in the book, as you mentioned, the little girl does have Millie to help model how she might break out of her shell in these social situations and make these connections. And I didn't have dogs when I was a kid. I have four now because
Oh,
I love them so much, and they are exactly what you say. I know my neighbors because of my Labradoodle and my Golden Doodle, who just cannot
oh.
resist running up to them. But for me, I think what helped me come out of my shell was my own children. So
Mm,
I joke that I was more like the little girl, but my kids were more like Millie. So they would
sure.
run to whoever they could meet on the playground, and I had to learn how to follow suit. So there were so
Yeah.
many things in the book that I connected to, whether it was I was like the little girl, I didn't have dogs, I wanted to have a dog. I now see the effect that that has.
Uh-huh.
I think you're right. There's so many different entry points that people could come into this book, and it is such a it's a beautiful full circle kind of book that you just feel really good at the end
Oh,
when you close that last page.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I'm especially excited because one thing I didn't mention yet is that I'm from Harris. Well, I'm not from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, but I currently live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I moved here in 2016. So I still like as I was working on this project, because we know picture books take several years to actually publish. So when at the time I was starting this project, I was still feeling fairly new to the city, and like there were certain landmarks that became my favorites, and I'm really interested and into location drawing, drawing on location. So like a lot of like street scenes and landmarks and things like that. And so my idea for this book was to place Millie and her girl and her mom in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So people who aren't familiar with Harrisburg may not notice, but I'm excited for the local people who will notice like a mural or a bookshop or a coffee shop or a market, things like that. And so that was extra fun for me to be able to go out and draw on location and then bring those drawings back to the desk to kind of fit into this picture book. And so yeah, even some of the people in the book are people in the neighborhood. So yeah, I'm and the dogs as well. And the other thing I didn't mention is that the dog Millie was actually modeled after one of our dogs who passed away. His name was Peanut. And so Peanut wasn't maybe personality wise as friendly and lovely as Millie, but he had a little bit of a grumpy side, maybe because he was older too, by the time I met him. But Peanut had the same brown spots, and short little legs like Millie does in the book. So yeah, it was really fun to also put my pets into the story. So little
Yeah,
segue there. Yep.
I love that because you said, the story comes to you in maybe bits and pieces until all of a sudden it comes together. And I love hearing that there are bits and pieces of your life in the book, the location and the dog. And I'm a little jealous now of readers who will be able to get that local kind of experience and will know that. But I've got a whole list in my notebook, a bookish bucket list, of all places I want to visit because of books. And so
Right,
I may not be able to enjoy those connections now, but I could in the
right.
future as something to look forward to.
Some people do vacations, based on, yeah, travels, to go to a book location. I think that's really neat.
Yeah.
Uh,
If I could convince my family of that, I would do it all the time.
right? You all have to be on board for that one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So tell me more about the choices you made in terms of the illustrations, because we've talked about the content of the book. I love, and I think I see threads of it among Nana of the City and The Troublemaker, other books as well. Well, I love your style of having kind of the outline, got like a blackish outline, and the characters are the important things. And then there's, elements that look some like crayon or paint or watercolor. It's just beautiful shading. It just evokes a really wonderful feeling. And so I'd love for you to talk about the illustrations because you're both, and I get to ask you all sorts of things since you've done everything in this book. Can
Oh,
you
sure.
tell us a little bit about that part of the picture book and how you made those choices?
Yeah, sure. So when I do school visits, I like to share my art making with the children. And one of the things they're always surprised to see is how small I draw. And so because I draw so small, um, the lines when they're enlarged take on this very outliney, almost coloring book type appearance. And so people do often comment on the thick bold lines that I use in my art. And part of that is I draw with ink, like either a quill dip pen or just some of my favorite felt tip type pens. One of them is called a Tumbo for any of you artists out there who are into that.
I am not an artist, but I
T-O-M-B-O-W.
love my Tombow pens.
Oh, okay. You know Tombos. All right, great. Yes. And yeah, I love them and they come in different like thicknesses too. And they're just wonderful. And so those are some of the pens I use. And what I often do is I'll draw my picture book spreads at about 50%, like the final drawings. So sometimes even smaller. So that would be you know, what is a picture book spread maybe 20 inches by 10 inches, something like that. So it ended up, so my final pieces are about half of that, so 5 by 10, right? And what I do then is I scan them and I print them out on like basically a watercolor paper, some either a Strathmore or an Arches type paper. So I print them out with a waterproof ink printer. So the lines, it almost comes out as like a coloring book page. And so for me, this is my favorite part of the art making process. All of the tedious drawing and details are finished. And then I get this basically coloring book page that I get to sit down and play with watercolors, pastels, markers, you name it. And every book is slightly different. The outlining process is usually the same for every book, but the way in which they're colored is a little bit different. So Millie, I actually used light watercolor and then soft pastels on top. And so that gave it a little bit of a different look than maybe Nana in the City, for example. Nana in the City, I used more watercolor and I used markers and basically everything for that book, honestly. So yeah, so slightly different materials, and some people don't notice it, some people do, but for me it's fun to switch it up a little bit, even if in the end it doesn't look like it's that different from another book that I worked on. For me, it just gives me like, oh, like I did something different, and like, you know, I get to switch it up a little bit. So it's important for artists to switch up their materials and play around with new things and new techniques every once in a while. So yeah, that's something I try to do with every book.
Yeah, and I would agree, like, you can tell the themes, but each book is unique and has this
Oh,
different focus.
well, thanks
I
for noticing.
Oh my gosh, you're welcome. That's why I love picture books, because the picture
Sure.
hold, equal weight with making meaning in those stories. I,
Yeah.
I don't know much about the illustration process. I can make stick people, Lauren, and that is it. Although I
Um,
do love to pretend and make, not very nice looking things with my really cool fancy pens.
hey, the only way it gets nicer is to practice. You know, I was making stick figures first too. You know, that's why I always tell kids, like, often children, once they get it in their mind that they can't draw anymore by age like fourth, fifth grade or something, they just stop drawing, and that's why they don't progress, is because they stopped. You know, so practice makes not perfect but better, right?
Right.
So I mean, for me, it's the same thing, and I constantly redraw characters and everything in my books. So it doesn't come, it comes easier to me, but it doesn't come that easy to me. I'll say that. So
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Well, I really didn't know, um, for obvious reasons, I'm not an illustrator, but the idea that you make them half the size and
yes,
then they're blown up and then it's like your own beautiful personally created coloring book. I love that. That I can relate to more because I do love adult coloring books.
yeah,
Because you
yeah.
can't mess them up. At least in my mind,
Oh,
I can't mess those up. And I just
exactly.
love that you have that same kind of element of then just having fun and putting the colors on and mixing and matching and doing all the media, and just it gives me a new appreciation as I'm literally flipping through the pages of Just Like Millie, um,
Oh,
for how they got there.
yeah.
I love knowing that backstory now.
That's great. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's helpful to take the pressure off and like the preciousness off. If, say, you work on a drawing and you may work on 5 or 6 rounds of a drawing or something, and then you really get it to the way you want it to be, and then once it's scanned, you have that copy, and so it would be, this would be a tip for my artist friends out there, like, or those who are wanting to make art, like, take your time making your drawing, and then like you can print out 10 of it and play around with different types of coloring, watercolor, pastels, markers, like a mix of everything, printmaking, like it becomes really fun, and it, like I said, it takes the pressure off, and it's my favorite part of the art making process for sure. So
Yeah. Just imagining that sounds fun. I'm just playing
yeah,
and seeing what
exactly.
comes up.
Yep. Yep. And
Okay.
those are the days, I'll just add, those are the days that I get to put on podcasts like yours and just play and listen to great stories and interviews and have fun. And yeah, those are my favorite days in the studio.
Yeah. They sound inspiring. Just, yeah, it's all about play, right? Just find what feels good and keep doing more of it and then share it with
Hmm.
readers who get to enjoy it.
Yes,
I love what
absolutely.
you said about, of course, now I'm not going to remember exactly what you said, but it was about not being perfect, but also not obsessing over that preciousness too. Like just
Mhm.
do it, put it on the page. You can
Yeah.
always do it again, you could scan it. Everything is revisable, right? In a good way, which
Knowing, right, and knowing when to call it quits, because sometimes, like a lot of times, the imperfections are what make it yours, what make it unique and what make it beautiful. And like too perfect is, sometimes it takes the emotion out of, the piece, and people are less connected to it. So I think that's what good art is, kind of knowing to just when to stop and, hands off and move on to something new. So
and then let the receiver or the reader or whatever kind of piece take it up and then bring it to life in their own way.
absolutely. Yeah. Love that.
Oh, it's wonderful. I'm looking at it with new appreciative eyes.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that.
So before we wrap up, I'd love to, just ask you, not necessarily for you to name new projects that you're working on, but you've got a lovely backlist and it sounds like you still love the work, you're still doing it. Are there things, that you're hoping to try or do differently or work on as you keep growing and evolving?
Sure. That's a great question. I think something that I found when I started working on the Our Friend Hedgehog chapter book series was how important those types of books are to young readers. I had a hope that would be the case because I was a young person who had a hard time. I struggled going from picture books to middle grade, to chapter books and books that had less pictures in them. I really leaned on the art to help me understand the stories, and I just loved the art, which made sense as somebody who liked to make art. And so it was kind of sad for me moving to those middle grade novels where there was less, and not that I didn't love them eventually, I love middle grade novels too, but there was just something about that in between of going from picture books to chapter books, and missing out on that art. And what I was hoping for with Our Friend Hedgehog was to create a series that had a longer form story for those kind of transitional readers, but also had art on every page, like, something there for those kids that were like me, when I was young. And so I had, like, it's been very rewarding, because with picture books, you don't often hear from kids because they're so young. My picture books, I have 2, 3, 4, 5 year olds reading these books. So
Right.
obviously they're not going to reach out to me, but something about the like first, second, third graders, like I'll get notes from students or parents, relaying a story from their kid, about like how meaningful that type of book was. And so this is all to say, like, I guess my hope is that not only will I continue with this series, but that there's more stories like that in me, and that I can make more books that are kind of in that middle, that first, second, and third grade reading range, for kids that really, those kids that really love that art, and we have wonderful graphic novels, and those are ways to get that, art with longer beautiful story. But yeah, I'm really enjoying this format, and I hope that I can continue with that. So yeah, that would be my answer on that question.
That's
Definitely.
great because as a teacher, elementary, and as a mom that had kids that were readers, that is a need. That
Yeah,
is
yeah.
a need because it's a wonderful transition that a lot of readers look forward to. Like, ooh, I'm getting to the big kid books. I'm going to the chapter books. And then,
Right.
so much. so much of the context that they were used to in a book disappears, and they have to do that own work in their head, which is wonderful.
Sure.
But the pictures, they are everything to a lot of us. And so to be able to have something like that to help them bridge that gap and still enjoy what they loved, I
Yeah.
think that's just such a wonderful, special kind of pocket of time. And I love that you're doing that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think that I will say, like, I started working on this book back in 2016, and the market was so different regarding that area of need. And I think it's definitely improved and expanded, and there's a lot of authors and illustrators that are coming, to that kind of that early chapter book arena, and I think that's awesome. So there's more choices for those little readers who are interested in those types of books.
The more books, the better, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Oh, well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I can't wait for readers to get Just Like Millie as well as many of your other books into their hands. So I'd love for you to end by sharing with us where we can find you online and where we can find your books.
Yes. Well, I have a website. It's laurencastillo.com. You can find information about me and my books on there, and often I'll post events that I have there as well. And also, I'm on social media. Most social media at Studio Castillo is my handle. So Twitter, Threads, Instagram. Instagram's my favorite. So yeah, please connect with me there, and I'd love to connect and hear from you. And I hope if you read my books that you enjoy what you read, especially my newest, Just Like Millie. So
Yes.
thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you are most welcome. I'm so grateful you took the time to come chat with me today, and I'll make sure to put links to your websites, your social handles, and links to the books themselves right in the show notes to make it as easy as we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. I loved being here, and I can't wait to dive into more of your podcast episodes as I'm coloring between the lines.
Oh my gosh, you've just made my whole day now imagining you working on the next project with Kidlit Love on in the
Oh,
background.
absolutely. No, I'm excited. I love podcasts, and I haven't listened to a number of yours yet, so I'm excited to dive in.
Well, thank you so much. And listeners, thank you so much for listening. And we'll see you next week inside the next episode of the Kidlit Love podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Kidlit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of kid lit love. Thanks for listening.